In this video, I'm going to talk about patterns. I'd be remiss if I didn't do a video on patterns. It's such a big part of Taekwondo. I've got a lot of pattern videos on my channel, and some students might notice that they don't always exactly match the pattern as it's done in the ITF, and that is by design. There are a number of martial arts schools that were founded prior to the creation of the ITF, which is the International Taekwondo Federation. And the patterns aren't always exactly the same between ITF schools and non-ITF schools, but also every school kind of puts their own unique signature into the pattern. You have to remember that at the end of the day, the pattern is a sequence of movements, right? It's just a sequence of foundation movements that you're doing. So what happens is schools will make subtle changes, just very, very small changes to patterns. And the reasoning behind that is they want to be able to tell whether the student has learned the pattern from a book, like if they just went on the website and looked at it and learned it that way, or if they actually trained at a martial arts school and learned that pattern. And in many instances, if you're familiar with other schools in your area, you can actually tell which school a student trained at just by how they do their pattern, because you can recognize right away, aha, you know, that is that particular school's style, and yes, they do it that way. So yes, this person did in fact train at that school. You know, you know where that person came from, so to speak, and you know that they didn't just do the thing at home out of a book, that they actually went to a school and learned that pattern. So anyway, like there are some differences in the way I do the patterns in my video. You'll see some subtle differences in the moves. One of the things that drives me crazy with ITF patterns is they do a lot of the techniques so slow. Like their pace when they do the patterns is slower than our pace. There's such a pause between the movements. It's very, very noticeable. Our patterns have a little bit more flow to them. Another thing you'll see with ITF patterns is really over-exaggerated bending and dipping movements, and everything is, you know, we've got this backwards movement before we go forward, and we don't do that stuff. I mean, it's just your first movement is a forward movement and away you go. So there's a lot of things that they do that are just over the top, like they're exaggerated to ridiculous lengths, and we don't do the patterns that way. There are also techniques that they have in their patterns that are simply dropped from ours. Occasionally they will have an unusual technique where, for instance, in the pattern Jungun, which is a blue belt pattern, they've got a technique where you're doing a back fist side strike, and then you are releasing from a grip before you throw a punch, a reverse punch. We don't do this, you know, this dropping the arm to release from this grip before throwing the punch. We just go from back fist side strike right into the punch. Why? Because, again, this notion that somebody is going to be able to grab your wrist when you do a back fist side strike in that split second, it's such a fast technique, it's not going to get grabbed, and it breaks the flow of the pattern, right? We go back fist side strike and then right away into that reverse middle punch because it flows. If you're watching students performing the pattern and they're doing it the ITF way, then you see this back fist side strike, and then you see them just kind of drop their hand down before they throw a punch, and you're wondering, what were they doing there? Did they just try to elbow somebody? Why did they open their hand? Why were they doing that move? It doesn't, yeah, again, a lot of when you're doing patterns is they need to flow, they need to to look impressive, right? We're going for form here, right? It's supposed to look good. I mean, the techniques need to go together. They need to work, but it also needs to be something that looks very presentable when you're doing it in front of people and they're watching this pattern. It should look good. So there are these unusual techniques sometimes that you see ITF students doing that we simply don't do those in our school. So when you're watching the pattern videos on my channel, recognize that, again, the school that I trained at, which predates the ITF and WTF organizations, both of them, it's a faster pace to the patterns. It's the movements are more direct. There's not such ridiculous downward bending and these backward movements before going forward. No, it's more direct. It's more succinct, more compact. Those movements. So it's not that I'm doing the patterns incorrectly. It's that is the style of the school that I learned from. That is the style that I've chosen to keep for my school. And again, when you look at it move for move, you will see some subtle differences as you go through the patterns between how the ITF does them, how I do them. So again, like if you're just trying to memorize patterns and do it the ITF way, there's the ITF way. I've structured the patterns in such a way to give maximum value to students so that you're preserving the feel of the pattern. You can instantly recognize it as being that pattern, but at the same time, certain techniques that break the flow of the pattern that are not essential to that pattern are simply removed, and that is the way it's done at a lot of different schools. So keep that in mind when you're watching the pattern videos. I know you need to have a lot of space to be able to practice patterns in your home. Chances are it's best to go outside, use a backyard or something like that, or a park if you want to practice the patterns. But just keep that in mind when you're watching the videos, and just recognize that while we do follow the ITF pattern set, our patterns are not exactly the same as the ITF ones, and the way we perform the movements is not exactly the same as the way that they perform them. And it's not that one is right and one is wrong. It is simply that, there is an ITF style, there is also a WTF style for patterns, and there are also schools that are neither of those two. So you have to keep that in mind. Thanks.